In 1970, Creedence Clearwater Revival released an album packed with hits. But behind the scenes, things were falling apart. How can a band at their peak be so close to collapsing? This is the story of the album that nearly broke Creedence Clearwater Revival. It's called Cosmo's Factory. The story begins when Creedence Clearwater Revival rose to fame in the late 1960s. They became one of America's most popular and influential rock bands in a very short period. The band had been playing together with other bands throughout the 60s. The core members consisted of John Fogerty, Tom Fogerty, Stu Cook, and Doug Clifford. They played together under various names. One was the Blue Velvets, and the other was the Gollywogs. In addition, they released several unsuccessful singles with Fantasy Records during that time, but in 1967, everything changed. That year, after John Fogerty and Doug Clifford returned from military service, they decided to dedicate all their time to music. They renamed themselves Creedence Clearwater Revival, a name derived from a friend's name, which is Creedence, a beer commercial slogan, Clearwater, and their renewed commitment to the band, Revival. John Fogerty also took on the roles of lead singer, lead guitarist, and primary songwriter, but it was something that would also lead to their downfall. But now, it was time for this band to release their debut album. CCR released their self-titled debut in May 1968. This album was unlike anything else out there. It was a new genre of music, which was later called swamp rock. It was a sound that mixed blues, rock and roll, and country. The album gave them their first hit single. It was a cover of Dale Hawkins' Susie Q. The single reached number 11 on the US charts and put them in the public eye. But things only got better from there. In 1969, they released 3 hit albums and multiple singles. Pretty impressive for a band to release 3 albums in 1 year, even for that year. But their level of production wouldn't last forever. At this point in their career, they were still going strong. The next album was called Bayou County, which was released in January 1969. This album featured the legendary hit single Proud Mary, which peaked at number 2 on the Billboard charts and became one of their most well-known songs. Then they released Green River in August 1969. I did a video on this, which I will link at the end screen. This album was their first number 1 album in the US and included hits like Bad Moon Rising and Green River, both of which also reached number 2 on the singles chart. Then they released another album called Willie and the Poor Boys in October 1969. This album continued their hit streak with songs like Down on the Corner and Fortunate Son, which became an anthem of the Vietnam War era. At this point in their career, they started to become more popular, but there was one event that really gave them the recognition they deserved. In August of 1969, CCR played a headlining set at the iconic Woodstock Festival. This was their chance to play on the same stage as some of the greatest bands in the history of rock. But their appearance at Woodstock exposed them to a large audience. Many of them were people who still didn't know who they were, but luckily, they got even more exposure after making several appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show, which was one of the most popular TV variety shows that helped expose new rock bands. Their success could be attributed to one man. His name was John Fogerty. He was the driving force behind the success of the band. First of all, he was a primary songwriter. He wrote nearly all of CCR's hit songs. His ability to write catchy hooks and thought-provoking lyrics was crucial to their widespread appeal. He was a meticulous songwriter. He often took months to perfect a song. Not only that, he was also the lead vocalist. He had a distinctive, gravelly, and powerful voice that became synonymous with CCR sound. It was instantly recognizable and perfectly conveyed the raw, personal, and sometimes gritty themes in his songs. As his brother Tom Fogerty famously said, "I could sing, but John had a sound." Although Tom would become a major catalyst in their downfall, as I will get to later. But John was not just their singer, he was also the lead guitarist. John Fogerty's guitar playing was a major factor in creating CCR's swamp rock sound. He created memorable riffs and solos that were both proficient and soulful. He often incorporated elements of blues, R&B, and country. He was a primary musical arranger for the band. He made sure that each song sounded like it was meant to sound. He was known for being very perfectionistic in rehearsals, and he insisted that his songs be performed his way. Finally, he was a great frontman. In other words, John Fogerty had this amazing ability in commanding the stage and connecting with audiences. But now you know the origin of the band. Let's discuss the album in question, which is Cosmo's Factory. Now you may be thinking, why did they name the album Cosmo's Factory? Let's talk about that first. The name Cosmo's Factory has a simple yet significant origin. It was named after drummer Doug Cosmo Clifford's nickname for the band's rehearsal space. Now, as I mentioned before, John Fogerty was a very demanding perfectionist. He insisted on the band practicing almost daily in a warehouse in Berkeley, California. This machine-like work ethic led Clifford to jokingly refer to the space as the factory. So Cosmo's Factory was inspired by their intense rehearsal schedule and a person who coined the term for their hit-making machine. It reflected the band's productivity at the time, as they released 5 albums in just 2 years, which, as we know, would eventually come to an end. CCR was one of those bands that was constantly recording. As Doug Cosmo Clifford noted, they didn't record more songs than needed for an album. They essentially had albums ready to go in that order to be released. So for Cosmo's Factory, they worked hard in their rehearsal space that they nicknamed the Factory. They made sure that they were fully prepared when they went to record. This intense preparation meant by the time they hit the studio, they were incredibly tight and often laid down tracks in 1 or 2 takes. One thing that's notable about this album was that there was a lot of variety in terms of musical styles on this album. While it's often categorized broadly as swamp rock, the album delves into several distinct genres. This really showed off John Fogerty's ability to be a musical chameleon. Some of the songs still had their signature swamp rock sound, such as Run Through the Jungle, but there were other styles used here as well. One of them was the blues. For example, the song Before You Accuse Me, which is a Bo Diddley cover. Then the song showed the band's love of classic electric blues. They delivered the songs with their signature tightness and John Fogerty's bluesy guitar licks. The album also has My Baby Left Me, which was an Arthur Big Boy Crudup cover that was also popularized by Elvis Presley.
Never said a word. Was it something I done?
The album also has some rock and roll and rockabilly. John Fogerty was a big fan of 1950s rock and roll. This influence is evident throughout the album. One of the key tracks is Travelin' Band. This is a high-energy rocker directly inspired by the frantic style of Little Richard. It has a driving rhythm and saxophone parts, which were played by Fogerty himself, and the song was directly influenced by early rock and roll. There was also the song Ooby Dooby. This was a Roy Orbison cover, and it was another song with a really classic rockabilly sound. But one of the best songs on the album was called Ramble Tamble, a very unique song because it starts off as a rockabilly song, but it transitions into more of a psychedelic song, which was one of those genres that they didn't really play often, despite the fact that it was one of the most popular genres at the time. Let's not forget that CCR also loved country music, and one of the most country-sounding songs on the album was Looking Out My Back Door. The The song had some upbeat lyrics, acoustic elements, and includes an instrument called the dobro. It's also probably one of the most country sounding tracks as well. Finally, CCR was one of the few bands that could infuse soul and R&B into their rock sounds. This could be heard on the classic track, I Heard It Through the Grapevine, which is a Marvin Gaye cover. It's a very epic song because it's 11 minutes long and it transforms this Motown classic into this big jam session rock song, but the song is still able to retain the soulfulness of the original. While Cosmo's Factory represents the commercial and artistic peak of the band, it also marked the beginning of the end due to the band's internal tensions. This was primarily driven by John Fogerty's complete creative control, which caused a lot of resentment in the other members. I mentioned before that this band had a very tight and demanding schedule, which is why the album itself is called Cosmo's Factory, as it was named after their non-stop assembly line approach to making music. As a result, this caused the band to be or feel burned out after a while. I also mentioned how John Fogerty was a sole songwriter, lead vocalist, lead guitarist, and producer for virtually all of CCR's material. He wanted things the way he wanted, so this meant that there wasn't a lot of creative input from the other members, who were Tom Fogerty, the rhythm guitarist, Stu Cook, the bassist, and Doug Clifford, the drummer. There were even rumors that John Fogerty would even re-record the other members' parts in the studio if he wasn't satisfied with their performance, although it's unconfirmed. Even though it might be exaggerated, it speaks to the level of control that he had. The other members felt they were essentially session musicians in their own band because they had to do what John Fogerty wanted. So this led to a growing frustration and a sense of being undervalued. Another reason the band was frustrated was because John Fogerty didn't want to include any songs written by Tom, Stu, or Doug on the albums. The band's contract stipulated that all four members had to agree on the material, but John's dominance meant his songs were always chosen. This was a big problem for his brother Tom Fogerty because he was originally the band's leader in their early incarnations, as I spoke of before, which were the Blue Velvets and the Gollywogs. So he felt his creative contributions were not being seen. Not only that, John Fogerty was the band's manager. His bandmates felt that even though he was a brilliant musician, he wasn't well suited for management, and that it was one of the biggest mistakes that ultimately led to the band breaking up a few years later. There were also lots of financial arrangements and publishing rights and legal battles, but I won't get into that in the video. Maybe someday I'll do more of a dedicated video for that. In the end, Cosmo's Factory was one of the most important albums and possibly their best, but I guess it's all debatable. After this, they released another album called Pendulum in 1970. Tom Fogerty left the band in early 1971 because he had enough, and then the remaining three members made one more album called Mardi Gras in 1972, and this was where John Fogerty allowed each member to contribute to songs and sing lead, but it ended up being a critical and commercial disaster and considered their worst album. It was the thing that really broke the band as they broke up in 1972, which is the end of our story. So if you're interested in some more Creedence Clearwater Revival, check out this video I did on Green River. It's another classic album. I will stick that right here. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Please give this video a like. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you have not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.